And welcome to Governor Live. It's the 29th of September, I believe, on Thursday. And Ruth Agnew is leading our session tonight on succession planning. She's going to be looking at some of the issues around that for governing bodies. You may have read the blog post that she wrote, both on her own blog and on, not on her own blog, yes, on her own blog about why she's stepping away from being a governor, or at least being a governor in a certain school, and also the blog post that kind of accompanies this event, which is talking about succession planning and how maybe we don't take it necessarily seriously enough in some cases. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to just move on to introduce things. There we go, should we got here first? Right, so tonight, as I mentioned, just some housekeeping, just so you know what the score is, as it were. First of all, we can't hear you. If you're talking angrily at your screen or your device that's in your hand, we can't hear you. But you can communicate in other ways. You can use the text chat if you've got a question. That'll be the main way in which you ask a question, will be through the text chat at the bottom right. That may move around as we switch between screens, but it will always be there. And you are always welcome to use it to give your feedback. It can be comments, it can be questions. You might find a useful link you want to post in. It's entirely at your discretion. Our video might pause. You'll have seen if you came in early that Ruth's video was paused. That just gives us the ability to drink tea, blow our nose, do whatever. Or actually, when Ruth's speaking, I will just pause my video because there's no point in me just watching me have a bobbing head, just watching Ruth speak. It's much more important to see her speaking. If your connection does drop for any reason, maybe someone pulls out a cable on your router, or someone decides to watch Netflix in your house at the same time, then you can just come straight back in. If you, for some reason, you lose connection to the room, just come straight back in and you'll be absolutely fine. We will still be here, I hope. And hopefully in here we're going to conduct ourselves as we would in a governor's meeting. That doesn't mean it's dull. I don't know what your governor's meetings are like, but there may be some quite banter. I don't know if that happens in your governor's meetings, maybe not. But you know, you can be irreverent if you want to, but it's being respectful. And also, I think the really important thing, as I've mentioned a couple of times, is thinking about confidentiality. If you're talking about situations in schools, please don't name the schools, please don't name any individuals. Please just be sensitive as to how it's working, and you know, as you would if you were talking about this to another governor in front of other parents or something like that. You just need to think about that. I'm sure you're all more fully versed in this than I am. And any questions you've got, feel free to ask them. We will try and get to all questions that we can. And to be honest, I imagine that Ruth could probably answer. If you're on Twitter or you drop an email in, Ruth can put her contact details in, and you could always drop in an email later on if you feel your question hasn't been answered. We will do our best, though. The event is being recorded, and I will try and get the recording out as soon as I can. It may even be this evening, but I'm not promising that. Okay. Steve, I'm afraid I don't have any cake. I have a half-eaten biscuit. That's all I've got. So you're welcome to share whatever you're eating. That normally happens at the start of these things. But while I introduce Ruth, if that's okay. So just let me close something else here. Right, so tonight's speaker, as you can see, below me or next to me, depending on how you're looking at this, is Ruth Agnew. She is, oops, let's go back to here. She's a former LA Governor Services Manager in the Northwest. She's been chair and governor in multiple schools, and also a member and chair of IEBs. She's a national leader of governance and also an NLG advocate, which is something you might not have come across. She also runs her own company that does governance consultancy, which is RMA Governance, and she's on Twitter at Ruth Agnew and RMA Governance, depending on which kind of flavour of her you'd like to see. So I'm going to hand straight over to her now. I will pause my video. Please ask any questions as we go. There will be a space for questions at the end, and we have had some questions submitted online via Twitter today of people who can't be here, had some quite specific questions about succession. So we're going to try and answer those as well. So there will be, rather than a yawning gap of no questions, there will be plenty of some stuff to get us going, and you may want to respond to those questions as well, because they may cover similar areas to what you have. So let's now just switch over to Ruth, and I will step back.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? I'm assuming you'll let us know via the chat box or via the options if you can't hear me. So good evening and welcome, and it's great to have an opportunity to share a few thoughts around a succession planning this evening. As Ian said, the idea for this evening came out of a blog that I wrote over the summer, and some of the responses to that via Twitter and comments on the blog and so on. Seems as if it's quite a topical issue. As Ian said, I've worked around governing bodies for a long time, and I conduct reviews of governance, and I work with different governors with my National Leader of Governance hat on. And this is something that I see being an issue in some governing bodies fairly regularly. So I thought it's an interesting thing for us to reflect on. I'm going to share some thoughts around some slides, but it's not all going to be me talking. We're going to have plenty of opportunities for discussion, and as Ian said, please put your questions into the box as we go through. Raymond says, I'm speaking very quickly and sound a bit muffled. I'm not sure I can do anything about the muffled, but I will try and speak more slowly, and apologies for that. Okay, so in terms of my own background, if you've read the blog, you'll be aware I've just changed schools. I've been a governor in a primary school for the last 12.5 years. I was chair there for the last 7, and I left the governing body at the end of last term. That was quite difficult to do. I loved being a governor there. I loved that school. It meant a great deal to me. Both my children went to that school. And it was very, very important to me, still is a very important school to me. But I've reflected a lot since I became aware of the National Governors Association policy around terms of office for governors and terms of office for chairs. And you may be aware of that policy. And NGA would say no one should be a governor more than 8 years in the same school, and no one should be chair for more than 6. And I know from experience that someone in any room, when you're talking to governors, will be potentially offended by that because they've been a governor or a chair for longer than that. And my own feeling is that those numbers are a bit arbitrary, but I understand the principle. And though, of course, it's partly about bringing new skills through, it's partly about bringing new experience through, but it's also partly about being able to retain some distance. And that becomes more difficult, I think, the longer you've been in a school. But there may be some strong views on that out there. I'll be very happy to hear different points of view on that. But I came to the point of thinking, actually, I do believe, if I'm a system leader, I need to set a good example. I think the time is coming for me to leave this school and move on and move my skills on elsewhere. So I became a governor in another primary school and became chair in that primary school fairly quickly, and that's about 18 months ago. And I gave my governing body 4 terms notice that I would be leaving, that I'd be leaving the role of chair and leaving the governing body. And we talked about how that gap was going to be filled. So we'll talk a bit more about that as we go through some of the slides, because some of the issues on this first slide are relevant to what we did in my own school as well. So I want to talk a bit about recruitment, and that's recruitment of governors generally, a bit about induction, a bit about developing leaders and spotting leaders and bringing them forward, a bit about leadership and distributing leadership, a little bit about the role of vice chair, and a bit about the role of chair. And that'll take us through the next 10 or 15 minutes or so, and then there'll be lots of opportunity for questions and discussion at the end of that time. I've referred to, and I've got it here, Succession Breeds Success. I don't know if this is a document you've come across before. It was produced by an organisation that I'm a member of, the National Coordinator of Governor Services. You will be able to find it on the internet. Actually, the most easily accessible version of it, the most current version of it, is on the National Governors Association website. If you go there and put in Succession Breeds Success into the search box, you'll find it. So I have drawn quite heavily there on what's a public document, and COGS are aware that I'm referring to that. So the thoughts within this booklet are my thoughts around succession planning. Recruitment of governors in the first place has a role to play in the whole area of finding future leaders. So we want to get that recruitment right. We want to find people with the skills and experiences that are going to contribute to effective governance. Thank you, Ian's just shared the link to that document there in the chat box. We want to get the recruitment right, so we've got the right skills, the NGA would say the right people round the table, and so that we can nurture those skills and bring forth future leaders, as well as having the other skills that we need on our governing body. And just a few thoughts about recruitment. Being a good, effective governing body in the first place is one of those things that's likely to attract governors to our governing body. One of the reasons people always give when I ask them why they became a governor is that they want to make a difference. And if a governing body is seen to be making a difference in a school, that's your starting point, I believe, for effective recruitment. I also think sometimes we recruit governors too easily. We're just too relieved when someone says, go on then I'll do it. And sometimes we need to be a bit more selective, so I'm a great fan of there being proper recruitment processes in our governing bodies. And for those of you that have co-opted positions on your governing bodies, when the governing body is making the appointments, we've got the right then to ask for application forms if that seems appropriate, and certainly to interview individuals that want to come forward to be a member of our governing body, to have that dialogue with them. Do they understand the role? Have they got the skills and experience that we might want on our governing body? And it's really important to be clear as well with people joining the governing body about what the role entails. Now, it is a voluntary role, and sometimes people feel that almost means that anyone should be able to volunteer, but actually those of us that are governors that are listening know the expectations placed on governing bodies at the moment, and the accountability there is around being a governor at the moment, and we need to make sure that we get that right in terms of recruitment, and we need to make sure that people understand what they're coming into. And too often I still hear of people being told, well, it's just 3 meetings a year, and we need to be clear with our expectations around people that we want to join us. And that links us in to good induction for our governors, making those expectations really clear. Have we got a code of conduct? What do we expect from our governors? Around attendance and commitment and reading papers and preparation and visiting school. Really important that people understand what it is they're coming into, what the expectations are. Nobody comes into and volunteers for anything because they want to fail, they want to succeed. And one of the ways of doing that is to make it really clear for people what we expect of them to enable them to succeed. Clear roles, so if they take a role on within the governing body, what does it actually mean? What does it look like? If I'm safeguarding governor and your governing body, what does that role entail? How often do I have to visit school? What should I do with the information I get? What kinds of questions should I be asking? It helps people to engage quickly and fully if they understand what's expected of them. And feeling that they're making a proper contribution, people having real responsibility, is one of the things that helps people get engaged, get involved, feel like they're making a difference and want to stay. And then holding people to account as well, an important part of retention, making sure that people are doing the job that they've said they will, and that they have a clear understanding of what that is. This all contributes towards people really feeling engaged in the governing body. And as they become engaged and as they start contributing, that's our opportunity to be looking for the leadership potential. And commitment is one of those things that we'd be looking for in that leadership potential. And so I'm sure you're aware of the expectation now that we undertake skills audits. I've seen a great many skills audits being undertaken over the years on my own governing bodies and governing bodies that I've worked with. Too often they're done, but nothing's done with them. So they then gather dust on the clerk's desk or the head teacher's desk. So really thinking through what skills we're looking for, what skills are important to us in our governing body, what skills have people got, and where are the gaps, and how can we bring people forward if they've got skills or potential for leadership. Making sure there are training opportunities. We don't always allocate a training budget for ourselves, for our governors, and often governors feel we don't want to take money away from the children. But actually, if we consider it a significant, serious role that's really contributing to outcomes for children, then we need to take governor CPD seriously. And there are, of course, opportunities to develop leadership skills. You may be aware that the National College's Chair's Leadership Development Programme, which is running across the country in different areas via different licensees. So opportunities there for people to join that course, for aspiring chairs or aspiring leaders, to join a programme like that, to share with other leaders and aspiring leaders and develop their leadership potential, their leadership skills, and to find genuine leadership opportunities, which I suppose is kind of similar to my next point, which is about distributing leadership, finding genuine leadership opportunities for people to share in, to feel that they're contributing in some way. And I suppose the most obvious one of those is committee chairing and potentially vice chairing of committees. Some of the governing bodies that I work with that have taken succession planning very seriously have vice chairs in place of their committees. It's not a statutory role, it's not a mandatory role, but it means that there are people identified and a range of people identified across the governing body as having a leadership role within that governing body. And important for those committee chairs to take on responsibility for those committees, for the work of those committees, for making sure the committees are running effectively. The kinds of things that the chair of governors would be doing for the governing body should be undertaken by those committee chairs. And I know increasingly governing bodies are having kind of chairs committees, leadership committees, where those leaders on the governing body get together to plan strategically the work that the governing body is undertaking. And I've put there as well, what are other key leadership aspects, the kinds of things we expect the chair to do, representing the governing body, for example, to public bodies or at outside meetings or at school events. Perhaps there are things there that other leaders within the governing body can undertake. The relationship with the head teacher, sometimes it becomes the chair, and the chair is the only governor that has much of a relationship on a one-to-one basis with the head. Perhaps we need to open that up and find ways to get other governors engaging with the head teacher. So that we need to think, I think, more carefully about what the role of the chair entails and how much of it the chair themselves has to do and how much can be shared around, and think and plan for ways of getting other governors really engaged in those leadership aspects of the governing body, including perhaps holding other governors to account for certain roles, or maybe taking a key role around governor induction or training. Some of those aspects that are often left to the chair may well be better devolved to other governors. And I think the role of vice chair is a really interesting one. I was vice chair on my governing body before I became chair for quite some time, and obviously I work with a vice chair now, and very different situations, and the vice chair role will look very different in different schools, but you won't find it defined anywhere other than to say in the regulations, in the absence of the chair, the vice chair will be expected to take emergency decisions and so on. So it can be a bit of a non-role, particularly if the chair is never absent. If you've got a very committed chair, the role of the vice chair may feel very insignificant, and that can obviously be demoralising for people in that role as well. So really effective governing bodies where succession planning is taken seriously think very carefully about that role of vice chair and aspects of leadership that they can be taking on as an individual, and perhaps aspects of chairing meetings as well that the vice chair can be taking on. So important to kind of really think through, what is that role, what does it entail, what responsibilities does it have, what's the vice chair accountable for, so that they're really contributing. And again, important to think about their development and to think about how the chair and the vice chair can share the load of leadership, share the role of leading the governing body, so that it's not a kind of one-man band, as it were, for the chair of governors, one-person band. I apologise. And then I also think we need to think about the role of the chair itself, because too often I hear people saying, I could never do that. I couldn't do that job like our current chair does. I don't have the same amount of time that they have. I don't have the same knowledge of education that they have. I couldn't be, who they are, what they are. And I think we need to really think, those of us particularly that are chairs, need to really think about making sure that we make it clear that the role of chair can be done in lots of different ways. And it's not just about us and the way we do things. We will have developed ways of working with our governing body, with our head, with our school, that suit us, that fit in around our commitments. And if that means we come into school frequently, that may then give the thought to other governors that has to be done in that way. So we need to think about the role of chair and think about how it can be done differently, and think of ways that we can help other governors engage with that idea of taking on the role and taking on that responsibility. In the same way that we would succession plan for the role of head teacher and give the deputy head and other leaders opportunities to see how leadership is in other schools and how headship works in different places, and how they may then take on the role of acting head somewhere. What the National College's research says is that although deputies may say, we don't want the role of head, when they've actually tried it out, very often they think, yes, actually, I could do this. I do want to take on the role of head teacher. And perhaps we need to think about how we can manage those kinds of opportunities for the other leaders within our governing body and for our vice chairs. And there is a danger sometimes we make the job seem doable. Perhaps some of us get too close to our schools, and I do know chairs of governors who are in school every day or very, very frequently, and that starts to be seen as the way that it ought to work. And some heads will like that, other heads won't. But it's really important that we make it clear that the role can work in lots of different ways. So what I did in my school, I'm not saying this is a perfect model, but I gave 4 terms notice to the governing body, and I asked that someone step up as co-chair. And it's only fairly recently that I've come across this role of co-chair. I think it was fairly ambivalent in the legislation whether it was allowable, but the current government's been quite keen to promote the role of co-chair. So we actually had 2 chairs on the governing body for the last 3 terms that I was at that school, and still had a vice chair as well. So people were given a turn to think about whether they wanted to be the person that stepped up into the role of co-chair. Somebody did. We worked alongside each other for the whole of that year, and that person came along. When I met with the head, we would meet with the head together. And that gave the opportunity for me to take a step backwards, and that person started chairing the meetings and so on. So when the time came, really, it didn't feel like a big stepping down, a big change, a big transition, because the transition had already started. And that was something that we found useful and that worked in that context. So those were the kind of thoughts that I wanted to share with you. I haven't been able to read them, but I see that there was some...
Can I just ask, Christine's just asked, in that particular context that you described there, what was the size of your governing body when you were asking for someone to kind of step up and co-chair? We'll come to some other questions, but I think that's just pertinent to what you just said.
It was a governing body of 14. I think we had 12 governors in post at the time. So kind of average size of governing body.
Okay, that's grand. We've got a number of questions that have come up in the room. So what I'm going to do is just change the layout slightly, and we'll post these questions over here. And let's make these a bit bigger so they're visible, hopefully. And we'll come on to some questions that have come in via Twitter, sort of maybe later on when we've looked at these. We may run out of time. We may finish early. But Ruth, do you want to maybe look at some of these? I put the first names of the people who've asked them, so you can respond to them directly.
Okay, well, let's start with Steve's question. Do I recommend a timescale for being chair? Not a specific number of years, no. I mean, there's not even unanimity about it around the National Governors Association, the DFE, because Lord Nash would say 8 years for chair of governors. I've heard him say that. I suppose for me the more important principle is keeping in mind that need to have distance and that need to kind of bring freshness to the role. And some people are very successfully sustain that within their work with their governing body, and perhaps some people never quite manage that, or they lose that very early on. So for me, it's not about how many years, it's about the principle of making sure that there's somebody to step forward and making sure that the role doesn't get too cosy and that you don't lose that ability to have some distance and that kind of external eye. So if you want to come back to me on that, Steve, if you've got any further comments, please do so. We'll move on to Patricia's comments. And yes, some schools find it very easy to recruit governors, and some schools find it much, much more difficult. And there's not always a obvious reason to why that's the case. There is pressure on the governing body. There are increasing responsibilities. Some people see that as attractive. As a role that actually, this is something I can get my teeth into. This is a role that actually is really going to make a difference. And I suppose the attitude we have to it ourselves plays a role around that. I love being a governor, and I try to give that message to people that I meet that are interested in being a governor as well. But in terms of if your school is experiencing specific difficulties, you may want to think about your own community links, whether there are groups that you could go to that you may not have relationships with yet, but you could develop relationships with, or that you have got existing relationships with. You might want to put adverts out there for the role of governor. into local businesses, into local community groups, into the local churches, and to talk about the fantastic opportunity to make a difference in your school. There are businesses that actually consider it a really useful role for their employees to go into, because they see they see their employees developing skills and experiences that they may not actually get in the workplace. So having the opportunity to be on a head teacher's performance management panel, to be performance managing your highly paid professional, may not be an opportunity that someone gets through the workplace. So some employers are actually very keen to promote the role of governor to their staff. So finding out about those in your area and getting in contact with those. And there are, of course, organisations, the national organisations that are available as well to try to help us find governors. ESCOS, School Governors One Stop Shop, Inspiring Governors Alliance, and also if you're an academy and looking for trustees, there are academy ambassadors. So 3 organisations that are currently trying to help schools find governors and trustees. So it may be that going to them would find people, volunteers in your area that have already applied, that would actually be interested in coming onto your governing body. And certainly on the governing bodies I've been over the years, we've had some very successful recruitments via ESCOS. And one of the advantages of taking people in that way is it brings some diversity, because there's a danger that we tend to always recruit people that we know that someone's had a contact with, that's a friend, or that someone knows, and actually bringing someone in completely from outside again brings a kind of fresh perspective and a fresh pair of eyes. But a related question from Karen: can governing bodies be too picky? I think yes and no. I think you have to have high standards, and we should be looking to apply those in a recruitment process. But in the context that you put it, Karen, there about not wanting certain parents, I think we have to be very careful about that, about what the reasons behind that are. If they're seen as a certain, as parents that might bring a viewpoint that's not popular on the governing body, I think we need to be very, very careful about that, because what we do want is diversity, and that's one of the things that makes boards effective. So yes and no. I don't think we can be too picky in terms of applying high standards to the governors that we want to recruit. But actually, we need to think carefully about the skills and experience that we're looking for. And if we start to give the impression that the skills and experience that we're looking for are very highly skilled professional people, then I think that is wrong. I think actually we need to be thinking very carefully about our communities and the links to our communities, and having governors that understand those communities, as well as looking for other skills, which for me, communication and commitment, are part of those. So we need to think carefully about it, and we need to apply the criteria that we have, but we need to be careful that we're not applying inappropriate criteria, I think. We'll move on to Simon's question. Simon's asking about the vice chair. It doesn't have to be the automatic succession plan. It can be another governor. And absolutely it can be the case. The vice chair may well not want to step up, although obviously they would have to for a short period of time at least. If something happened to the chair was no longer available. That's what the role of vice chair is. It has to be there to be the acting chair if the chair is not available. But no, it may not be that they have any aspiration to be chair, and they may be actually very good at supporting someone else's leadership and want to remain in that position. So we certainly shouldn't narrow our thinking in that way. And we should try not to narrow our thinking, I suppose, anyway. Sometimes people feel that it has to be someone who's got a long period of service on the governing body, but actually somebody who's recently joined the governing body may have the skills to move quickly into the role of chair and quickly develop those leadership skills. So I think we need to keep an open mind about who those people are who've got the potential to be chair. Josh has asked what process I went through to identify the person who became the co-chair. I asked people to speak to me about if they were interested in the role. So I had that person spoke to me. We had a conversation about what the role entails and whether it's something that they might be able to take on. So I think it was after the second meeting where I said I am really going to be going at the end of next year. I'd like people to come forward and speak to me if they're interested in the role of chair, and we had that conversation. And it seemed to be someone eminently suitable. So at the next governing body meeting, I explained to the governing body that should come forward, and we elected the co-chair at that point. Okay, Jackie's got a question about encouraging governors to question and challenge in meetings. And obviously that's an issue of concern for all of us. We want our governing bodies to be as effective as possible, and that's part of effectiveness is sharing that responsibility to bring questions and bring challenge and also bring support within meetings. And though chairs use different strategies around this, some chairs would advocate directly asking governors' views, and I think it's one to be careful of, because it can put people on the spot and make them uncomfortable. But to actually say to someone, if they haven't contributed, would really value your opinion, your view on this one. I know that some governing bodies, some chairs ask governors to submit questions in advance. I even heard of a situation recently where governors were all asked to submit questions, and then the questions were kind of distributed out and everyone had to read one, just to allow people to kind of model and actually experience asking a question in a meeting that may have never experienced it before. I've had times when I've gone round the whole governing body and said I need a view from everybody on this, so I'll warn you now, I'll be coming round to you in a moment. So perhaps so-and-so could start us off, but we'll be taking a view from everybody in the room. I know that some head teachers on their reports leave space for people to make notes and ask their question, write their questions down to prepare. So there are different kinds of strategies. You can encourage governors to attend training on what questioning and challenging really means and what's effective around questioning and challenge. And that might then help them and encourage them to then put that into practice. And one of the other strategies that I think chairs ought to really consider is having one-to-one meetings with their governors. Not quite appraisals, not quite a performance management, but a chat at least once every 12 months, one-on-one with each governor, to have a chat with them about how they're feeling about being on the governing body, what they're contributing at the moment, what else they might like to do, what they might want to get involved with. I suppose it's part of a skills audit, it's a more in-depth part of the skills audit, and you may have an opportunity there, if someone isn't contributing, to unpick that with them a bit. Find out why. There might be a barrier for them in terms of contributing to meetings. They might feel intimidated. There might be language that they're not understanding. And chairs can take that opportunity to encourage governors in their role and encourage them about the importance of hearing from everybody and everybody asking questions. That's an opportunity to help. Okay, I'll look at the this is question next. We find it hard to select a chair. We all work full time. We live in a community village. A balance between being able to give time to support the head, being a good chair in that respect, and knowing your time's limited. I suppose that last question, are we being too cautious and overthinking it? There is a danger of that. There is a danger that we get into this way of thinking that unless the chair is able to get into school every week, then they can't be a good chair. And we perhaps just need to think about different ways of managing that. I talk to my head teacher on the phone fairly often. We exchange texts, we exchange emails, and we meet face to face. And in the current levels of technology we've got, there are lots of opportunities for us to communicate without having to meet face to face. I think if any governor can never ever get into school, then I think equally that's a problem, because schools are very, very quiet, empty places when you go there at 7 o'clock at night for a governor's meeting or whatever time you have your meetings. The lifeblood of the school is not there, and it's hard to get a feel for whether the decisions you're making in the governing body are having the impact you want them to on the school without ever being in, seeing the staff, seeing the children during the working day. So I think it's something that we ought to take into account when we're recruiting governors and when we're inducting governors, to think about whether they can get into school, and it certainly is an important part of being a chair, but we need to not make it a barrier to becoming a chair. I often hear people say you can't have a full-time job and be chair of governors, and I think if we ever get to a point where that's the case, then we've got a problem. Because we want people to be able to, to bring skills that they learn at work into their role as chair as well. So if we only ever feel that people who aren't working can be chair or that are working part-time, I think that's a problem. And I'm not saying that people in that position can't bring obviously a lot of valuable skills and experience into the role of chair as well. But we've got to make it doable, and if you're all working on your governing body, you've got to find ways of managing that, ways of managing it between you and maybe the chair and the vice chair, or chairs and vice chairs, manage that between them. What would otherwise be done by one individual in a different governing body. Okay, Josh has asked a question. If you open up co-chair to the whole governing body, what would happen if more than one put their name forward? At the point of expressing an interest, it's not an elected position, but actually it then does become an elected position. It wasn't that I selected the co-chair, we then put it to governors. When the position of chair came up for election for my final 12 months, we said we're going to elect 2 people into that position now. So it did go to governors, and obviously if more than one person had come forward, we would have had to think about how to manage that election. I must admit, it's not an election I've ever had to manage or had to think about managing. It could be complicated having 3 people for 2 roles. And I'm thinking about the possibility that I might not have been elected. I think the other 2 people might have been elected if 3 people had come forward. So you would have to think about how that would work and take some advice from your clerk if that situation came up. Or it might be that you sat down, if the chair and the 2 people that had come forward would sit down and discuss it, and between them they would agree who would stand, and maybe one would go into the position of vice chair, and you might take on a second vice chair. And then obviously there is then a challenge about how the role works, who does what. So you've got to make sure that you're communicating then as individuals once you've got into that situation.
So we just have 4 questions come in kind of together. So Sue's one is there about non-contributing governors. There's quite a bit of discussion about that.
What's the best approach to removing non-contributing governors? Well, I would start with saying...
In a kind of humane way.
I would start with saying, if their term of office is up, don't reappoint them. And I've sat in governing body meetings and seen people that aren't contributing being reappointed on the nod. We need to think very carefully about making sure that doesn't happen. So with people having to reapply for their position. Governors can be removed through, and the best approach to doing that, I think, is having a really, really clear code of conduct. So that's your best starting point, that all governors have signed up to. And when I say that, I mean literally signed on a dotted line and say, I am going to do this, I'm going to come to meetings, I'm going to be well prepared, I'm going to raise questions, so that you can hold them to account around what they've signed up for. So that's your starting point, and normally it would be a conversation, normally with the chair, though if you're distributing leadership, it might be with someone else, about what are the barriers to contributing? Is there an issue? What is it that's stopping you attending meetings? Or what is it that's stopping you fulfilling the role that you've said you'll take on? So having that conversation first. Sometimes governors do say, I didn't want to let anyone down, but actually I don't feel I can do this role, my circumstances have changed, or whatever, and they stand aside. It becomes more difficult, more confrontational, obviously, if you decide you want to remove them even if they want to stay on the governing body. You're probably aware of the rule that if someone doesn't attend meetings for 6 months, in a maintained school, they're automatically removed if their apologies haven't been accepted during that period of time. And in an academy, you can choose to remove them after 6 months if their apologies haven't been accepted during that period of time. So if that's the reason for their non-contribution, it may be that you could just remove them for non-attendance. If it's that they're there, but in body only, as it were, and they're not actually contributing in any other way, again, a conversation with them, that kind of around that, if you like, performance management type discussion. But ultimately, you could propose that someone was removed on the basis of not fulfilling the code of conduct. And certainly, it's been talked about in guidance from the Department for Education that if someone refuses to attend training, they could potentially be removed for not fulfilling their commitments under the code of conduct. So there is then a formal process to go through. If they're a co-opted governor, they can be removed by the governing body. If they're appointed by some other body, you would need to have that conversation with the appointing body. If they're an elected governor, elected parent governor, they could be suspended. It would be quite a heavy-handed action to take against an elected governor, so you'd need to think carefully before you took that decision. I hope that's answered that question, Sue, but please come back to me if there's anything else you want to talk about. What, if any, changes would you make to this session for schools in or planning to join a multi-academy trust? I'm not quite sure I fully understand Karen's question there. You might want to add a little bit there, Karen, to help out. Yeah.
Ruth, I wonder if this is to do with what Chris says a bit further up in the main text, where he talks about experience of being an LGB chair and now a MAT chair, and etc., etc. And I think at such a time of massive change, forgive me if I'm wrong, I may have got this completely wrong, Karen, but when you're looking forward to everyone is, there's a wave that's coming of academisation, and we all know we're going to have to kind of ride it at some point, as long as grammar schools don't become the magic bullet. You're appointing someone to do that job, are you not? Are you not appointing someone effectively to negotiate your school's transition into a MAT or into a standalone or whatever it is going to be? So is it slightly different now to it may have been 3 or 4 years ago when you were appointing someone to look after your local school, and now you know that this is going to, we assume that this is going to happen. Karen, is that accurate, or am I? Yes, what Chris says. I think there is such amount of change that the chair is a very, it's a role subject to a lot of upheaval, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think what Chris is saying though is if there was an automatic kind of limit on the term of office and the schools in transition, it would seem absolutely wrong and inappropriate for the chair to step down at that point. I think even National Governors Association do recognise that there might be a key pivotal moment where it wouldn't be appropriate for a chair to step down. And so for me, you're absolutely right, and I haven't mentioned it yet, the circumstances of the school do come into play there. If you are in the middle of recruiting a head teacher's just left, it might not be a good moment for the chair of governors to leave as well. And you may well need somebody that understands the school really well and has a history with the school in that situation. But personally, I'm not an advocate of saying it has to be a certain number of years and then step down. So you would always make that judgment on the basis of what's the context of the school at the moment, what's the impact of stepping down going to be, but trying to plan so that if that situation arises, we've got people that can step up. And of course, those of us that are chairs, none of us knows at what point we may no longer be able to carry on the role despite our best intentions. So we have to make sure we've planned for that. Of course, you could argue, you go into a local governing body, you take your school into a MAT, you become the chair of the local governing body in a larger organisation. In some ways, it's a fresh role. So it may well be that yes, it would have been time to step down, but actually at that moment when it's a new governing body growing up in a new situation, yes, having that experienced chair there is really, really important. So I wouldn't say, I wouldn't have any hard or fast rule about chairs standing down at that point. Okay, could we hear more about making the role of the chair attractive? But it is a massive bureaucratic workload, is that just our school? I guess there are elements of bureaucracy on every governing body, but I also know, having been to lots of different governing body meetings, there is more bureaucracy and more apparent kind of bureaucracy and red tape in some schools than in others. So I suppose we need to think about what is it that makes the leadership role, I suppose, of any organisation attractive. It's about being able to bring influence. It's about being able to have that input into the strategic direction, about having influence over the pace of change. And some governors get very frustrated because their chair isn't moving things forward. So it is about being able to really have a key influence in moving the governing body forward. And if you believe, as I do, and I'm sure you wouldn't be governors if you didn't, that the governing body does make a real impact in schools in terms of the strategic direction, the ethos, and all of those other things that we're being held accountable for, then actually having a leadership role at the forefront of that can be quite exciting. I find it very exciting in terms of influencing and shaping practice, helping the school forge forward. So showing more of that side and less of the bureaucratic side, I suppose, is one of the ways that I would do that. Sharing the workload so we don't make it look an undoable role. And if our chair is in school every day, twice a week, 3 times a week, I hear chairs talking about it taking at least 2 days a week every week of their lives, then we need to think about whether the role has become an unmanageable kind of role in our school, and we need to perhaps have a think about it. Going back to that idea of kind of having a role description for the role of chair and the role of vice chair could be a really good starting point there. Let's go back to the drawing board and really think about what we want the role of chair to be, not what it's morphed into in our governing body, but what we'd really like the role of chair to be, and perhaps that would actually make the role seem more doable and more attractive. How do you suggest a long-standing chair who's ineffective but popular is encouraged to stand down? Okay, well, there are a number of ways. You could have a conversation with them directly as a governor and say, actually, I think, have you thought about, that perhaps the time is coming? You could decide to stand against them yourself, and that's a brave thing to do against the long-standing chair. But it's something, if there is never any competition for that role, then that person is never going to move on. Lord Nash talks about a need for the egos of adults never to get in the way of the best interests of children. And he was talking about governance reviews and governance leadership in that context. And I do really strongly agree with him. There's a danger it becomes about me, about us as individuals. And I thought that as I wrote on my blog, and I said at the end of it, actually, it wasn't without tears. That was really true. I still feel sad when I walk past the school, every time I walk past the school, and it's half a mile from my house, I walk past it very often, I still feel sad about it because I was very emotionally attached to the school. And all of that just makes me think I made the right decision in standing down, because there's a danger it was becoming about me and me enjoying the job too much. I'm not saying we shouldn't enjoy the job. So I think there is a conversation to be had, and we have to not worry about hurting people's feelings if they're not doing a good job for the children in the school. And sometimes that's hard, but I think we have to take it more seriously. Okay, Joanna says the chair is very controlling, doesn't encourage other governors to participate. Governing body feels disempowered, but no one's experienced enough to challenge. Well, you can take them succession breeds success and say, I've been looking at this and thinking about the fact we need to take succession planning more seriously, what can we do about it? And I appreciate when you're not chair and your chair is as you describe, it's difficult to start that kind of conversation. But if the whole governing body is feeling disempowered, then there needs to be some change, and at least you may well find that you have some kind of impetus for change as well. Governors do complain to me about their chairs fairly regularly, and my question is always, well, why do you re-elect them? And often then it's we don't want to hurt their feelings, or there's no one else standing. Well, we need to then think about the reasons for that and trying to get some of the barriers down around the reasons why people either aren't standing, or why we're too worried about hurting our chair's feelings. We've got to get beyond that. And I appreciate it's difficult. I mean, talking to the clerk might be helpful. Trying to get some input into agendas can be helpful. Going back with your kind of naive questions. I've been doing this training, or I've read this, and I see that good practice around it, such and such as this. So have we thought about giving that a try? So raising those kind of questions in meetings, so that the chair is kind of put on the spot, and perhaps then it will be accountable around actions to the governing body. So trying to get them to take on board some actions about changing and improving things. And actually, if you can't get them to do that outside the meeting, actually speaking up in a meeting and getting that minuted and getting actions in place might help. But I appreciate it's a challenge in that situation.
Ruth, we've just got Josh's question here, then I'm going to swap over, if it's okay, to the questions that were sent in during the day from folk who couldn't.
Okay, our school's about to go through an expansion to become twice its current size. Should we be thinking of next year being someone with specific skills to oversee that? Okay, and might it be best for that person not to be a parent governor? I think there's two different questions there. So let's think first about the specific skills to oversee that. I think there's an inherent danger in that question, Josh, around thinking that the chair needs to have the professional skills of the stuff that's being done in the school. And my worry always with that is that we get too sucked into being operational. And I think building projects I've seen as a big example of that over the years. And I remember reading a couple of reports quite close together of schools that went into special measures, and both Ofsted reports commented on the fact that the governors had been really useful around recent building projects, but actually had failed to notice that teaching and learning and so on wasn't improving in the school, and that standards were slipping. So I just think we need to be careful that we don't encourage governors to get too operationally involved, and there is a danger if you've got someone as a chair that was project manager, architect, involved with building management, that they would feel they had to project manage the job themselves. So I'm not saying those skills might not be useful, they might well be, but in terms of what the role of chair is, I certainly don't think it would be essential, and there would be a danger that the chair may get distracted by that building project. In terms of whether it's best for the person not to be a chair of governors, not to be a parent governor, I lost my screen for a moment there, whether it's best for that person not to be a parent governor. There are people that hold the view that parent governors shouldn't be chairs, or there are all sorts of roles on the governing body that they shouldn't have, and I think we need to be very careful about the reasons behind that, what they are. Because once we're sat around the table, wherever we come from, whether we're a member of staff, whether we're from outside the community, whether we're an elected parent governor, when we sit down as governors, we're equal. And we all need to take off the other hat that we wear and think through the governor's lens. So if the implication is, as it sometimes is when people ask me this question, that the person won't be able to keep confidentiality, then obviously if any governor can't keep confidentiality, that is a big concern and needs dealing with. Or if it's because, as is sometimes purported for parent governors, they can only think about their own child and can't think of the good of the wider school. There's some issues, I think, around induction there. And again, we need to be very careful that parents understand that in their role of governor, they're looking after the interests of all children, and that the interest of their own child has to sit, below that. So we just need to be careful around that whole issue of whether the chair should be a parent governor. I know parent governors that make excellent chairs. The fact that they are or are not a parent governor, for me, doesn't influence whether they'll be an effective chair or not.
Okay, I'm just going to switch back to these other questions because we asked for a number of folks via Twitter, or anybody via Twitter, to ask some questions if they weren't going to be here. So these briefly, and we'll click through these. You should be able to see them. I will read them out if you can't see them, Ruth, although you should be able to.
I think I can see them again fine now, thanks, Ian.
Yeah. So Marie Crowley asks, what do you do when no one ever wants to take on the mantle of chair? Where do you go then? You might not be able to see Marie's tweets if you're on Twitter. She is a protected account, but you can follow her. I think her situation was that she is an established chair, has been there for several years, has been trying to step down about 4 times, did so once and it lasted about a week, but she says all of her governing body are new governors. And so she's she's the only person. Neil Yates came up with an answer that I don't think is viable, but is, I don't think that's the real answer. But yeah, what do you think about Marie's situation?
But I suppose there's an element, there's just a kind of slight strand of something serious in Neil's tweet there that I would reflect. I suspect by doing what Marie's done, and it's not a criticism of what she's done, because I'm sure it was in the best interest of her school at the time, but you do perhaps get people thinking complacently, oh well, Marie will carry on doing it, or whoever's the chair at the moment, they're not serious really, they'll carry on. So I do think you have to say really clearly, this is going to be it. I am serious. It isn't, if you can give notice, then that's obviously much, much more helpful. So if you can say, this is my last year, I'll be elected now, but this is my last year, then I mean that seriously, I'm going to leave the governing body at that point, or whatever your plans are. We must have somebody else ready by then. So very seriously, you've got to seriously think about it. Because there is always that danger that people won't stand up when they think someone else is going to do it. And if they start really thinking, actually, maybe no one else is going to do it, maybe it'll be me. And I would be thinking individually about every governor, do I think they've got the potential to do it? Then I need to go and say that to them. And think, I'm not saying you will be next chair, it's not within my gift, but if you thought about it, because you've got some skills that would be really useful. And actually that's very powerful with people. So I would be thinking, taking that view, it is serious, you've got to think about stepping forward now. Otherwise, you can't have a governing body. You can't have, it's a statutory position, the role of chair, somebody's got to do it. And you don't want to be in that situation that we mentioned in the blog where, there's that long silence and eventually someone says, oh, go on then, I'll do it for a bit if no one else will. So the more you can plan, the more notice you can give, the more you can think through who are these individuals with the potential, the better. And of course, if all else fails, don't fake your own death. You can always advertise the position externally, and I am seeing that happen more often. It's a suggestion that I've heard Lord Nash make, and it's something that I have seen on a few occasions, adverts being circulated around the role of chair of governors. So get someone in from outside that's got leadership experience elsewhere. You'd have to keep a vacancy to be able to do that if you're a maintained school, a co-opted governor vacancy to appoint somebody into, so that you could then take on, they could take on a leadership role. So careful planning and preparation, I suppose, is what I would say.
Then Martin Matthews asks, what do you do as a new governor if the chair steps down and wants to appoint their own successor? And
we all know that chairs can't do that, but we all know that it's possible that they might do. And I think Neil's response to that, governance is a collective responsibility. It can't be a chair-engineered appointment. And something we haven't really talked about as yet, but I think it's probably helpful to think about now, is how do we actually manage our elections? Because if we're managing them really well, it actually stops this being able to happen. So I would say what I consider good practice, and this is just me, is to ask to make it clear to everybody that self-nomination in advance of the meeting is the preferred option. So everyone's written to by the chair in advance of the meeting. By the clerk. Everyone's written to by the clerk in advance of the meeting. Please let me know if you would like to nominate yourself for the role of chair. Then there's no possibility in a meeting that the person who speaks quickest and loudest will get their nomination through. And I've seen that happen in meetings. Does anyone want to nominate someone as chair? Yes, I do. I want to nominate so-and-so. I'll second that, says another governor. Job done then, very unlikely that anyone else will stand. So just by speaking quickly and loudly, you can effectively be appointing your successor. So get your process right in the first place. Make sure that it's fair, that everyone's able to nominate themselves. And it's a collective process. The only way that somebody can become chair of governors is if there's a majority vote on the governing body. So governors have to take responsibility for preventing that happening.
So Nick Johnson asks, is succession planning focused on specific individuals, or should we be in a place where anyone can step up to become chair?
And I think that's a really interesting question. I guess in an ideal world, then we would be in that position. I suppose, is that what I really think? I think governors have different skills and experience to bring. And there will be governors, and I'm sure you're going to be governors on your governing body, you can't ever imagine them in the role of chair, but they're fantastic in the role that they do undertake. You know, their financial understanding may be amazing, they've got safeguarding experience that they apply. They're really, really good in that context, but they would never want to be chair, and you can't ever imagine them in that role. So I suppose we have to think about those different skills and experience. So for me, it would be about looking for the people that have that potential. Not just one, not a particular individual that we're kind of grooming to take over, but looking around, always looking around, people we can be developing, thinking how we can be delegating responsibilities to them and how we can be bringing them forward.
It's like the answer to Marie's question. It's about seeing potential, isn't it, I guess? It's about seeing potential in individuals. Yeah. Raj asks, what if a head and chair between, I suppose this is previously answered when in Martin's question possibly, what if the head and chair between them have already decided who will chair next? Is that the same answer?
Yes and no, I suppose. I think it's an interesting one because we're very naive if we're thinking that people aren't discussing things like this outside of meetings. I don't want to ever give the impression, I think, that everything's solved via open, transparent discussion in a meeting that everyone votes on. Of course there are discussions outside. And, I let my head know before I let anyone else know that I was going to be standing down. And yes, of course we had a conversation about who might have that potential on the governing body. That's not the same as deciding between us who would chair next. So I suppose it depends quite what you mean by that, because yes, there will be those kind of conversations going on outside. And again, it is for the governing body to take responsibility around that. And if it is someone that's not, you don't feel is appropriate, you wouldn't vote for them.
And then, I think there's something that came up. I don't know if there's any. I don't think there's any more questions on this, but Neil's going to answer there. But it's more to do with how I think the way you described how the vote is conducted. I think there were lots of comments about, but what if nobody has the gall to stand up to something that looks like it's being foisted upon us? It's that collective responsibility and
trying to get away from it being foisted in the first place. If you can set the systems up, it makes it really difficult, then you're in a much better place.
Yeah, absolutely. Grand. Okay, so what we're going to do now is thank you very much. We are nearly at the end. I want to do a couple more things, and I'd really like to get everyone's. Thank you very much, Ruth. I hope that was useful for you as well as everybody else. Maybe Ruth, if you want to put in the chat, if people want to contact you with any other follow-up stuff, can you put your email address in the text? Folks, what I'd like you to do is if you could go and answer these. We'd just like to know if you think this is useful. If you'd recommend it to other people, please be honest. If you wouldn't, then it helps us to improve it. These will always be free, these sessions. We're not going to charge for them, not if I have anything to do with it. And it would be interesting to find out what the outcomes were for this. So some of them are quite long in terms of the number of answers, so do tick all the ones that apply where there's a square next to it. If there's some good stuff, this is the kind of typical end of your face-to-face training, what went well and even better if sort of questions, the kind of cliched standard ones that everything is distilled down to now. We'd really appreciate your feedback on that, so maybe do that for a couple of moments. We are nearly at the end of the hour, but we'll probably run on for a couple of minutes if that's okay. In future sessions, we're going to probably be looking at the process of academisation and preparing for conversion. We have a number of sessions lined up that aren't publicised yet, but that's going to be coming hopefully in this term. And then I think we're planning on running at least one more session with Ruth, possibly thinking about training. And then we've got some other ones lined up for the spring term as well. And if you've already registered for this one, you will automatically be invited to all of those, so you'll get a notification when they're going live, and you can use your existing username and password to get in. So if you could just skip through and answer those while I'm rambling on to evidently fill some dead air, that would be grand. In terms of the recording, I'll talk about that in a moment. We'll come to a final slide that will just outline kind of what's next. And this will be, the recording will be in two forms. It will be on YouTube, so you can send somebody to an exact point at which we've asked a specific question, and there'll also be a slightly more interactive version that will work on computers but not phones. So we'll highlight that. I'm trying to write a blog post in the morning, which will have the recording in, and I will try and get the recording done this evening for you. So yeah, just interesting to see folks' answers to that. Academisation is one of the things, converters into academy, and how to challenge effectively. I think that would be a very interesting session. Maybe we could have someone playing the role of a unassailable chair, and then we can all explore how we might question them in order to have them. I'm not volunteering for that role, by the way, and I don't think Ruth is. But if you'd like to be a grumpy chair, but you know what I mean, you could always volunteer for that role. You may or may not need coaching in it. I don't know. So folks, if you just jump through those questions, that would be really helpful. And I'm just going to skip over to just finish off with a slide that kind of explains and kind of shows everybody on the recording what the recording is going to be. I will go back to this slide in a moment if you want to finish your answers to that. So let's just go off here. So the recording is going to be made freely available. It'll be on Twitter, Facebook, all the usual places. It'll be on the Modern Governor blog, and it will go out in the newsletter, which will probably be out next week. The recorded, all the posts to do with Governor Live, this session and the previous sessions we've run earlier in the year, will all be on moderngovernor.com/Governor Live. As I've mentioned, there will be some further sessions over the next term. And when you're finished, I will switch back to the other layout in a moment, so you can finish giving your feedback if you need to. Please don't feel obliged to. But I'd just like to say thank you to Ruth, because that I thought was really excellent. And yeah, you may feel this is the future of governor training, not to have to drive somewhere to watch a PowerPoint at 6:30 on a rainy night. I don't know, but I thought it was really nice. And yeah, thank you all very much for attending, and I hope you found it useful. I will just quickly switch back to the final layout, so you can go in there and do that if you want to. But yeah, that's done. When you're finished, please just close your browser and step away. Go and forgive me, we have run over by a couple of minutes, but step away, get yourself something fortifying, like a strong cup of tea or something. And yes, we'll see you again soon. Do look out. You will probably get a notification if you've registered tomorrow, giving you a link to the recording. So you should expect that probably around about midday tomorrow. I think it's going to go out automatically. But yeah, thank you ever so much. Please just close your browser if you want to leave. In a couple of minutes, I will gently turf you out, and you'll get a notification saying you've been asked to leave the room. Please don't take it personally. So I'm going to stop the recording now. But you're welcome to stay in the room and keep on answering if you want to give us any feedback. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.